at umiyak.
Dito lang kami sa makalabas ng aming pinto. Wala kaming shelter.
Yun ang nasirena na naman. Ang dami dito sa Beersheba ngayong hapon.
Ayan po, Diyos ko, narinig niyo po ba yun? Ayan po, ayan na po yung...
Yes, Shama, racket kinala.
Diyos ko, Lord, huwag niyo po kami pabayaan.
You're seeing harrowing clips of the ongoing violence between Israel and militant group Hamas, where hundreds of Filipinos are directly affected in the targeted cities of Ashdod and Ashkelon.
The Labor Department is now monitoring the situation, and while they are ready to repatriate Filipinos in the area, some OFWs would rather stay in the war-stricken country. Good evening, I'm Gretchen Hall.
And I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. Violent airstrikes continue in Israel as tensions have escalated. Overseas Filipinos there are passing the days in fear but are in no hurry to leave.
So far, there are no reports of Filipino casualties amid the conflict, but the Labor Department is keeping a close watch. Marian Enriquez has the big story.
It's been 4 days of cross-border fighting and airstrike between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas. And Israel intensifies its airstrike. Hamas relentlessly fires rockets, affecting the towns of Ashkelon and Ashdod in southern Israel. Every time she hears sirens, 32-year-old Pinay caregiver Lance Recto rushes to bring her employer and herself to safety in a bomb shelter inside the house. Lance says attacks have gotten more out of hand lately.
Wow! Why? Saan yun ang lakas? Why? Diyos ko po, Diyos ko po.
At one point, a rocket fell a few meters from the house, shattering their windows. She later found out that their neighbor's house had been hit. Her friend, an Indian national and a caregiver like herself, was among the casualties. Meanwhile, 34-year-old caregiver Ador captured how the Iron Dome defense system of Israel intercepted some of the rocket fired by Hamas, but some still managed to hit buildings and vehicles.
Sa war na experience ko simula 2011, 12 until 14, ito po yung pinaka-worst. Biruin mo, in 3 days, 72 hours, almost 1,350 rockets ang sinend nila dito sa Israel.
Ador showed us where they seek shelter every time they hear the siren.
Dito po ang shelter namin. Ito po yung pinaka-safe na pwesto. Yung kumbaga hagdanan po ito, pero matibay po yan. Yan. Kung makikita mo po dito, halos puno to ng tao pag may siren. May picture din ako mapapakita sa inyo mamaya. Nandito yung mga tao. Diyan sila nakapwesto. Kasi ito, hindi ito mapapasok to ng missile.
Ador and Lance are fortunate. Their residents are equipped with bomb shelters. But other Filipinos like Berna Bianzon are not as lucky.
Andito lang kami sa makalabas ng aming pinto. Wala kaming shelter.
Israel's ambassador to the Philippines, Rafael Harpaz, condemned attacks by Hamas.
More than 1,700 rockets were falling on civilians in Israel. Hamas is attacking from civilian areas in Gaza to civilian areas in Israel. It's a war crime.
As they monitor the situation, the Labor Department is preparing to repatriate OFWs who want to go home. But for Lance and Ador, leaving is not an option.
Hindi natin sigurado, baka mamaya magkaroon na ng katahimikan. Hindi naman po solusyon ng umuwi. Ano po, kaya pa naman po sa totoosin po.
For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
Just how bad is the situation in Israel and in the Palestinian territories? Let's get insights from Embassy of Israel to Manila Deputy Chief of Mission Nir Balzam. Good evening, Mr. Balzam.
Good evening.
Let's start with something basic that a lot of Filipinos are trying to wrap their heads around, Mr. Balzam. Why is this happening now? The conflict has been there for decades, but why the escalation again?
Last Monday, the terrorist organization Hamas started to launch rockets toward Jerusalem and other areas in Israel. In 5 days, more than 1,700 rockets were fired towards civilian population. Currently, as we saw, millions of civilians, Israelis and non-Israelis, are under intense rocket fire in central and southern of Israel. Hamas is deliberately targeting civilian population, and that's the main story here.
On the other side of it, of course, Mr. Balzam, people are looking at videos and news reports also on the Palestinian territories. They're also seeing civilian neighborhoods also suffering. Is there no way for this conflict, and not on both sides, not to be targeting civilian communities?
I think this is the main issue of this conflict. And again, the main blame is Hamas, because Hamas is committing a double war crime. It's hiding behind the civilian population of Gaza and shooting toward the civilian population of Israel. And as you saw, Hamas wanted to start to fire rockets at Israel. Israel has left Gaza Strip in 2005. There are no longer Israeli troops there. And with all the money and all the funds they get, instead of having another Singapore, we're having a terrorist area that, instead of investing in health, education, and the social population, they buy more missiles and just target civilians. And this is very, very sad story for the population of Gaza.
Yes, but again, we are seeing the rockets coming into neighborhoods in Israel. We're also seeing airstrikes from Israel hitting neighborhoods in Palestine. As from what you could control, what is being done to try to quell and keep the violence under control from your side?
Israel has engaged in a defensive campaign against a terror organization. Israel Defense Forces respond with precision strikes on terror targets in Gaza Strip. Those targets threaten immediately on Israeli civilians and non-civilians and sovereignty. And and unfortunately, this is the situation. And we need to ask Hamas, why are they firing from schools, from hospitals, hiding behind children and old people? Where's the leadership of Hamas? You know, they're probably hiding under the ground, under a hospital or under a school, because this is the way that they want it.
And one last question: when you say, and certainly those questions are being asked of Hamas, we're taking this opportunity to ask the questions of Israel. When you say that all of the airstrikes are precision strikes, is it your position that everything that has been targeted and hit in Palestinian territories are in fact Hamas sites and headquarters, and does the precision guarantee that civilian neighborhoods are not affected?
Civilian neighborhoods are affected because those are where Hamas store its rockets and its personnel. But I can tell you that there is no military as moral as the IDF. You know that before Israel strikes a building or a compound that we believe that there are missiles, we are trying to call personnel, and you can see video clips all over the social media how an Israeli officer speaks to a guard at a building that we just saw, and making sure everybody is evacuated. When the Air Force of Israel strikes a building or a compound, they first fire a dummy missile that only does noise. And then when we monitor it with drones and we see everybody leaves the compound, only then the Air Force strikes. I don't think there is any Air Force or defense forces that act in this way.
Okay. Israel's Deputy Chief of Mission to Manila, Mr. Nir Balzam, thank you very much. The palace says they are ready to facilitate emergency repatriation of Filipinos in Israel. Tonight's big number is 29,473. That's the number of OFWs in Israel. 12,000 Filipinos are said to be living in Tel Aviv. 300 are residing in Ashkelon and Ashdod, areas hit worst by attacks from Hamas.
These are the other big stories tonight. Quarantine classification has been eased in the NCR Plus bubble to general community quarantine, but this time it comes with heightened restrictions. Sources told Bloomberg flag carrier Philippine Airlines is indeed filing Chapter 11 in the United States. They're also considering letting go of some aircraft. And Philippine vet to the Miss Universe pageant Rabiya Mateo turns emotional after she was bashed for her national costume. These big stories after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. Metro Manila and nearby provinces will be under general community quarantine, but with heightened restrictions starting tomorrow. What will be the new guidelines? Maricel Halili tells us.
Starting tomorrow, May 15, until the end of the month, the NCR Plus bubble will be under general community quarantine. But this comes with heightened restrictions. Only essential travel into and out of the NCR bubble is allowed, and public transportation will remain operational. Capacity for indoor dining has also been increased to 20%, while alfresco dining capacity stays at 50%. For religious activities, only 10% of venue capacity is permitted. Outdoor tourist attractions can also reopen, but up to 30% capacity only. But some establishments remain closed, such as entertainment venues, internet cafes, arcades, amusement parks, and indoor tourist attractions. Only those aged 18 to 65 years old will be allowed to go out.
I will hold the local governments down to the last barangay level, and therefore it could only be the barangay captains. I will hold you responsible for any violation sa itong mga batas na hindi natutupad. Batas to.
Under GCQ, with heightened restrictions, non-contact sports and outdoor scrimmages are also allowed. Personal care services like salons and beauty clinics will remain open up to 30% capacity, provided that the services will not require removal of masks. Despite the eased restrictions, the president reminds the public to exercise caution when going out.
You go out, you just go hunting for those virus to enter your body and pass it on. And that is a problem. The problem is there is also the consequence which we must be mindful of.
The tourism department has also allowed staycations within the bubble, but only for people aged 18 to 65. The Department of Trade and Industry estimates around 200,000 jobs will be restored once NCR Plus shifts to GCQ. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
It was the second day of Pfizer vaccinations in Manila following yesterday's commotion among health workers who lined up for the shot. Demand remains high for the brand, but supply remains limited. Romel Lopez with the story.
As early as 2:30 a.m., Rhea, a nurse in Manila City, was already outside Santa Ana Hospital. For the second day in a row, she's hoping to get a Pfizer vaccine.
Sabi umuwi na daw hindi daw abot. So parang umuwi ako. And then others stayed. So alam mo, yun sila yung nakakuha ng number kahapon.
Day 1 turned out chaotic. Many hope to get their preferred vaccine brand, only to come home disappointed as only 200 plus doses were rolled out. For City Mayor Isko Moreno, that was a good problem.
Walang problema doon. Ang problema doon yung dagsa ng tao. Yung kagustuhan ng tao, which is a good problem.
But the situation now is different. 400 slots were opened. Queue numbers were also provided for those who did not make the cut today. For Dr. Shaya, the difference is night and day.
It was really magulo yesterday. There wasn't even, there was no announcement na there's no more slots, but people kept coming. I think everyone was excited to get Pfizer. There was only one hospital kasi. Today, there's like 6 different hospitals with plenty of scattered doses.
But it's not only in Manila. Other cities have noted a seeming difference for a specific vaccine brand. Take the case of Navotas.
Maagang mag-expire yung Astra, di ba?
Yeah.
June 30 yun, tsaka July 31 eh. So hininto muna natin yung Sinovac, and on a daily basis, mas madami nagpapabakuna.
For the head of the vaccine expert panel, the public, especially health workers, should take whatever vaccine brand is available.
That is why we are, convincing or encouraging or enjoining the healthcare workers to receive what is offered to them and not to, choose.
For News 5, Romel Lopez, We Are One News.
Time for an express look at some of the day's big stories. Philippines has expanded its current travel ban on India and other South Asian countries to include Oman and the United Arab Emirates. This comes after overseas Filipino workers from the said countries tested positive for the variant first reported in India. The travel restrictions will take effect until end of the month. Retired Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpio has launched a signature campaign to push President Duterte to retract several so-called damaging statements over the West Philippine Sea. In a petition on change.org, Carpio demanded that the president take back his claim that the 2016 arbitral win is just a scrap of paper. He also wants Duterte to retract statements on Chinese fishing and possession of the West Philippine Sea. Philippine Airlines is now preparing to reduce its fleet as it considers filing for bankruptcy in the United States. Citing unnamed sources, Bloomberg reports Chapter 11 filing, as well as the return of some aircraft to lessors, including 2 A350 Airbuses. Sources say the company is working on restructuring lease contracts and reaffirming other commitments. And some good news, the long-awaited Friends, the reunion is coming to HBO Max this month. To make it even more special, a star-studded guest list will join the iconic 6. Nick Garcia has the details.
Could we be any more excited? The much-anticipated Friends reunion will stream on HBO Max this May 27. The unscripted one-off special was delayed by a year due to the pandemic. In a teaser video, the iconic 6 cast members are walking arm in arm, set to a down-tempo instrumental version of the Rembrandt's I'll Be There For You, the sitcom's theme song. Special guests will also make cameo appearances, including Nobel Prize laureate Malala, Game of Thrones actor Kit Harington, football superstar David Beckham, and music icons Lady Gaga and BTS. Speaking of BTS, the global superstars will grace the June cover of Rolling Stone. It's another one for their books, as the first all-Asian group to appear in the magazine. Inside, BTS' first official interview on their second all-English single Butter, as well as an in-depth feature on how they became the biggest band in the world. Nick Garcia, We Are One News.
Time for another quick break. When we return, why did Miss Universe Philippines Rabiya Mateo cry after parading her national costume? The answer to that after the break.
Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're still watching The Big Story. Newly minted PNP Chief Guillermo Eleazar only has 6 months to effect change in the police force. How will he do it? Mobile journalist Tandy Gahete will give us a front seat to the story.
Itong cleanliness in the ranks, ito yung internal cleansing. We know that all the past chief PNPs have their own battle against police kalawag. At walang pinagkaiba ako, ganoon din ang plano ko. Kaya lang, I would start doon sa recruitment.
That was Lieutenant General Guillermo Eleazar, the 6th PNP chief under the Duterte administration. He wants to make a difference by cleaning up an organization whose image was tarnished by human rights abuses because of the drug war. Can he do it when he only has 6 months? But Eleazar is determined. Recruitment will happen in the coming weeks, and the PNP under Eleazar administration will use blind screening, which he first used when he was still the NCRPO chief.
We use the QR code system or quick response system. Walang pangalan, walang mukha, only their qualification would be the basis for their evaluation.
Eleazar wants the commanders to have close supervision, but the cleaning up of the ranks will not start from the bottom. It will be from the top.
Dahil ako naniniwala na magdadalawang isip buwan ng kalokohan. Ang sino mang pulis, kahit siya patrolman o general man, if they know na hindi sila ikukonsinti ng kanilang commanders, ng kanilang kasamahan at ng organisasyon.
In a country that values who you know than what you know, Eleazar wants to change the culture. In the 1980s, Marcos faced a mutiny because most generals stayed longer in their position because of patronage. The Philippines tired slowly to remove and to change the rules. But patronage or padrino system returned by the revolving door policy under President Arroyo. In November, we will find out if the Eleazar's reform did change the system.
If it will take years or decades bago yung buong kapulisan natin na 200,000 produkto ng pure complication basis, so be it. Simulan natin ngayon.
Stanley Gahete, We're One News.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories on print and online. No ball dropping this time. According to the Philippine Star, the government, led by vaccine czar Carlito Galvez, has signed a term sheet for 40 million doses of Pfizer vaccines. An initial batch of over 190,000 doses of Pfizer shots arrived earlier this week. Business World Live reported that 6 Philippine companies made it to Forbes' list of 2,000 of the world's biggest firms. SM Investments led the pack, placing 877th with a whopping market value of $24 billion. BDO followed with $70 billion in assets. Top Frontier, Ayala Corporation, LT Group, and Metro Bank also made it to the list. And from News 5, police arrested a retired U.S. airman and his Filipina partner in Taguig on Thursday for turning his condominium unit into a marijuana farm. Authorities found over 100 potted cannabis plants in the unit, worth some 2 million pesos in total.
And here are the big stories from around the world. Singapore announced the strictest curbs on social gatherings and public activities. Social gatherings are now limited to 2 people. Dining in is prohibited. The new restrictions comes at the heels of a rise in infections. The U.S. has started vaccinating teenagers aged 12 to 15 using Pfizer vaccines. U.S. President Joe Biden ordered vaccines to be made available to adolescents to allow them to return to school safely. Miss Universe 2018, Catriona Gray showed support for Philippine Rabiya Mateo, who received criticism for her performance at the National Costume Competition. Gray said Mateo doesn't need to apologize to the Filipino people, as the segment is not part of the scoring and is only aimed at celebrating culture. Mateo broke down in tears after receiving criticism on social media. The Miss Universe contender failed to wear her sun headpiece because it appeared to be uncomfortable. Mateo asked for prayers ahead of the swimsuit and long gown preliminary competitions tomorrow.
I was watching that kanina yung live and she was crying and she was saying sorry to the people that she disappointed. Pero alam mo, yun talaga pagka pag nagpo-perform ka, kasi I have a friend who tweeted, sana hindi siya pinagbabasa ng social media comments in the middle of her performance.
And in the meantime, I think we all appreciate she's trying her best and really she's just representing not just her team but all of us.
That's right. So, Rabiya, maraming salamat for representing the country and, we saw her human side today. I'm sure she will make us even prouder tomorrow. Well, that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again on Monday at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Gretchen Hall. We are One News. Have a good weekend.